The CEO's necklace slipped from her collar and Felix Thompson stopped breathing. He had spent 15 years being invisible, fixing broken machines, working double shifts, existing in rooms full of powerful people without being seen. None of that mattered now. Candace Wright, the youngest CEO in company history, cold, untouchable, and hanging from the chain around her neck was a ring. Not diamond, not gold, just crude copper wire twisted around a piece of blue glass with a chipped corner. A ring Felix had made with his own bleeding hands 20 years ago in an orphanage for a girl he had promised to marry. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss how this incredible story unfolds. Felix Thompson was 34 years old, a maintenance technician at Wright Industries, and a single father to an 8-year-old boy named Isaiah. He worked the night shift because it paid an extra $2 an hour, and because it meant he could walk Isaiah to school every morning before catching a few hours of sleep. His life was measured in small victories, rent paid on time, Isaiah's shoes replaced before they fell apart, enough groceries to last until Friday. He had grown up in St. Augustine Children's Home, a rundown orphanage in the outskirts of Baltimore. The kind of place where the heating never worked properly in winter, and the staff counted children like inventory. He left when he was 16, taken by a foster family who moved him to Ohio. He never went back. He never had the chance. Now he stood in the shadows of the executive floor at Wright Industries, his tool bag heavy on his shoulder, watching the most powerful woman in the building through the glass walls of the conference room. Candace Wright, 33 years old, the youngest CEO in the company's history. She had inherited the position from her adoptive father 3 years ago and had doubled the company's value since. The business magazines called her brilliant. The employees called her cold. No one called her by her first name, and no one knew where she came from before the Wrights adopted her. Felix had seen her before, of course. Everyone had. She appeared on screens during company announcements, walked through the lobby surrounded by assistants, attended quarterly meetings where people like Felix were not even allowed to breathe too loudly, but he had never been this close. Close enough to see the necklace she always wore, usually tucked beneath her blouse. Tonight it had slipped free. The ring caught the fluorescent light, and Felix felt the floor shift beneath his feet. He knew that ring. He had made it with his own hands. The memory hit him like a truck. Christmas Eve, St. Augustine Children's Home. 20 years ago. Felix was 14. The orphanage was freezing. The ancient radiators clanked and groaned but produced nothing but lukewarm air that disappeared before it reached the corners of the rooms. Most of the other kids had gathered in the common area where one of the staff members had managed to set up a small plastic tree with a few donated ornaments. But Felix wasn't there. He was in the back courtyard sitting on a cracked concrete step because it was quieter than being inside with children who still believed someone might come for them. She found him there. Lena was 13, small for her age, with braids that were always coming undone because no one at the orphanage knew how to do them properly. She was one of the only other black kids in St. Augustine, and they had developed an unspoken understanding, sitting together at meals, watching each other's backs, when the older kids got rough, sharing whatever extra food they could steal from the kitchen. "It's freezing out here," she said, sitting down beside him. "It's freezing everywhere." She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. "I hate Christmas." "Me too." They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere inside, someone was playing Silent Night on a radio that kept cutting out. The sound drifted through the walls, broken and incomplete. Lena started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears sliding down her cheeks, which she wiped away with the back of her hand like she was embarrassed. Felix asked her what was wrong, and she told him she missed her mother. Her mother had died 2 years before. Cancer. No family to take Lena in. She used to make sweet potato pie for Christmas and let Lena stay up late watching old movies. Now Lena didn't even have a picture of her anymore. They lost it when she got transferred to St. Augustine. Felix didn't know what to say. His own mother had left him at a fire station when he was 3 days old. He had no memories to miss, just a hollow space where they should have been. But he wanted to give Lena something. He looked around the courtyard, searching for anything that could matter. His eyes landed on a broken soda bottle near the fence. Someone must have thrown it over from the street. He walked over and picked up a piece of the glass, a fragment about the size of his thumbnail. It was blue, the same color as the sky on a good day. "Wait here," he told her. He went inside and found a piece of copper wire near the maintenance closet, probably fallen from an old lamp someone had tried to fix. He worked with it for almost an hour, twisting and bending, cutting his thumb twice on the glass. When he came back outside, his fingers were bleeding and his hands were numb from the cold. But he had made something. He knelt in front of Lena, took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold and slid the ring onto her finger. It was rough and uneven, the glass slightly crooked, but it fit. Lena stared at it, asking what it was. "It's an engagement ring," Felix said. His voice was serious, the way only a 14-year-old boy trying to be a man could be. "When we grow up, I'm going to marry you, I promise." She looked at him like he had lost his mind, reminding him they were just kids. "So I'll get a job, a real one. I'll make money and come back for you, and we'll have our own house. A real house with heating that works. And I'll buy you a real ring gold with diamonds." She asked him what would happen if he didn't come back. The question hung in the cold air between them. Felix squeezed her hand. "I'll come back. No matter what happens. I promise." Lena looked at the ring again. Then she looked at him and smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her in months. "Okay," she said. "I'll wait." That was 20 years ago. Felix stood in the hallway of Wright Industries, his tool bag forgotten on the floor, watching Candace Wright through the glass. She had finished signing the documents. Her assistant was gathering papers. The ring had slipped back beneath her blouse, hidden again. But he had seen it. He had seen her, Lena. She had kept the ring. 20 years. She had kept it for 20 years. The conference room doors opened. Candace walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her face unreadable. She passed within 10 feet of Felix without looking at him. Why would she? He was maintenance. He was invisible. But as she reached the elevator, she stopped. Her hand moved to her chest, pressing against the spot where the ring hung beneath her clothes. She stood there for a long moment, her back to him, perfectly still. Then the elevator doors opened and she was gone. Felix picked up his tool bag with shaking hands. He had a choice to make. He could stay silent, keep his head down, protect the fragile stability he had built for himself and Isaiah, or he could confront her and risk everything, his job, his dignity, the carefully constructed wall between his past and present. He chose neither. He would watch. He would wait. He would find out if she remembered him the way he was beginning to remember her. And then only then would he decide what to do. The next few weeks became a quiet obsession. Felix found reasons to be on the executive floor, a faulty outlet in the break room, a flickering light in the hallway, an air conditioning unit that needed inspection. His supervisor didn't question it. Maintenance workers were supposed to be thorough, and Felix had always been reliable. But he wasn't there to fix anything. He was there to be seen. He started with small things, a piece of blue glass similar to the one in the ring placed on the corner of Candace's desk during his routine evening rounds. He told himself it could be explained away debris from a broken window, something he found while cleaning. But it was deliberate. It was a test. The next morning he passed by her office and saw the glass was gone. Her assistant mentioned nothing about it. Neither did Candace. But Felix noticed that her hand kept drifting to her necklace during her morning meetings. She knew. She had to know. A few days later, Felix was repairing a ceiling panel near the elevator bank when Candace walked past with a group of executives. He started humming without thinking about it, the melody of Silent Night, the same broken version that had played on that static-filled radio 20 years ago. It was barely audible, just a few notes under his breath. Candace's footsteps faltered. Just for a moment. Just long enough for the executive beside her to ask if she was all right. "I'm fine," she said, and kept walking. But Felix saw her hand tighten on her folder. He saw the way her shoulders stiffened beneath her tailored jacket. The following week, he took a bigger risk. He was alone with her in the elevator, a rare coincidence that made his heart pound against his ribs. She stood near the buttons, her eyes fixed on the digital display counting floors. He stood in the back, invisible as always. "I heard St. Augustine closed down," he said, keeping his voice casual. "The old children's home in Baltimore. They tore it down a few years ago." Candace didn't turn around. The elevator hummed. "I wouldn't know anything about that," she said. Her voice was ice. The doors opened, and she walked out without looking back. But Felix had seen her reflection in the polished metal doors. He had seen the way her jaw tightened, the way her breath caught in her throat. She remembered. She remembered everything, and she was choosing to pretend she didn't. 2 years after that Christmas Eve, Felix was 16, and a couple from Ohio had come to St. Augustine looking for an older child, someone strong enough to help on their farm. The paperwork was processed in less than a week. They gave him 10 minutes to say goodbye. He found Lena in the back courtyard, the same place where he had given her the ring. She was 15 now, taller, her face losing the softness of childhood. She was sitting on the cracked concrete step, her knees pulled up to her chest, her eyes red from crying. She already knew. Felix knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I'm going to write to you," he said, "every week, and as soon as I turn 18, I'll get a job and save money, and I'll come back for you." Lena held up her hand. The ring was still there. "You promised," she whispered. "I know, and I meant it." He squeezed her hands tighter. "Wait for me." The foster parents called his name from the front of the building. Felix stood up, his legs heavy, his chest tight. "I'll come back," he said again. And then he was gone. He did write, every week for the first year, just like he promised. Letters filled with descriptions of the farm, the endless fields, the cows he had to milk at dawn. Letters asking how she was doing, if she was eating enough, if the heating at St. Augustine had been fixed. Letters begging her to write back. She never replied. What Felix didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the orphanage director had a policy about correspondence. Children in the system were protected from outside contact that might disrupt their placement opportunities. Every letter Felix sent was intercepted, read, and thrown away. Lena never saw a single one. She waited at the mailbox every day for months. Then she stopped waiting. She convinced herself that Felix had forgotten her, that the promise had been nothing but a childhood fantasy. 2 years later, when the Wright family adopted her at 17, a wealthy couple who had lost their only daughter to leukemia, she took their name and buried Lena somewhere deep inside herself. She became Candace. She excelled in school, graduated, top of her class, earned her MBA, and took over her father's company when he died of a heart attack. But she never took off the ring. Felix discovered the truth about her silence on a Thursday night. He was working late, fixing a thermostat on the executive floor, when he heard something through the wall of Candace's office. It was soft, almost imperceptible, the sound of someone crying. He moved closer, telling himself he should walk away, that this was none of his business. But his feet carried him forward until he was standing outside her door, which had been left slightly open. Candace was sitting at her desk in the dark, the city lights from the window casting long shadows across her face. Her computer was off. Her phone was silent. She held the ring in her palm. "I waited," she said to the empty room, her voice barely above a whisper. "I waited until I couldn't believe in anyone anymore." Felix felt something crack inside his chest. This was not the cold, untouchable CEO the world saw. This was Lena, the girl who had cried in the courtyard because she missed her mother, the girl who had smiled when he put a crude ring on her finger, the girl who had believed him when he said he would come back. He had broken her. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but the result was the same. He had made a promise he couldn't keep, and she had spent 20 years carrying the weight of it. The question was no longer whether she remembered him. The question was whether she could ever forgive him. Felix began to pull away. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. He simply stopped finding excuses to be on the executive floor. He stopped leaving signs. He stopped humming old Christmas songs in elevators. Because the truth was unbearable, Candace had built her entire life around the wound he had left. She had become successful, powerful, untouchable, but she had done it by turning herself to stone, and he was just a maintenance worker with a failed marriage and a son he could barely afford to feed. What could he possibly offer her? He had a 2-bedroom apartment in a building with thin walls and a landlord who was always late fixing the plumbing. He worked double shifts to pay for Isaiah's school supplies. He didn't own a car, took the bus everywhere, and counted every dollar like his life depended on it because it did. Candace owned a penthouse downtown. She wore clothes that cost more than his monthly rent. She had private drivers, personal assistants, and a board of directors who hung on her every word. They belonged to different worlds now. The chasm between them was too wide to cross. It was Isaiah who forced him to confront what he was running from. They were eating pizza on a Friday night, their weekly ritual, the one luxury Felix allowed himself, when Isaiah looked up from his slice with that curious expression he always got when he was about to ask something difficult. "Dad, have you ever made a promise you couldn't keep?" Felix felt his chest tighten and asked why Isaiah wanted to know. "My teacher said that if you break a promise, you have to apologize. But what if you never see the person again? What if you can't apologize?" Felix set down his pizza. His appetite was gone. "I think," he said slowly, "that if you get the chance to apologize, you should take it, even if it's hard, even if it's scary." Isaiah considered this, then asked if Felix had ever had to do that. Felix looked at his son, this small, earnest boy who trusted him completely, who believed that his father had all the answers. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. That night, after Isaiah was asleep, Felix sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his hands. The same hands that had twisted copper wire and cut themselves on broken glass. The same hands that had held Lena's face and promised her the world. He had spent his whole life apologizing in silence to Lena, to himself, to the boy he used to be. He had convinced himself that staying invisible was the same as staying safe. But Isaiah's question had exposed the lie. If he kept running, he would teach his son that men were supposed to hide from their mistakes instead of facing them. And that was something he couldn't live with. The annual Wright Industries charity gala was the social event of the season. Felix wasn't supposed to be there. Maintenance staff didn't attend galas. But HR had sent out an emergency request for servers, and the catering company was short-staffed, and someone had remembered that Felix Thompson was reliable and presentable and desperate enough for overtime that he would say yes to anything. So he found himself in a rented tuxedo, carrying a tray of champagne glasses through a ballroom filled with people who made more money in a day than he made in a year. Candace arrived late, as she always did at these events. She wore a black gown that made her look like she had stepped out of a magazine, her hair swept back, her expression carefully neutral. The ring hung on its chain around her neck, visible tonight, instead of hidden a small act of defiance that no one in the room understood except Felix. The evening proceeded smoothly until it didn't. Victoria Hayes, a senior vice president who had been gunning for Candace's position since the day she took over, approached the CEO with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Candace, darling, that necklace is so unique," Victoria said, reaching out to touch the ring. "Is that a family heirloom, or is it costume jewelry?" A few nearby guests chuckled. Candace's expression didn't change, but Felix saw her shoulders stiffen. "It's personal," Candace said. "Oh, come now, don't be modest." Victoria's smile sharpened. "We're all friends here." Where does one even find something like this? A craft fair, a children's art project? More laughter, louder this time. Victoria tugged at the chain, pretending to get a closer look. The clasp gave way, and the ring fell to the marble floor with a soft clink. It rolled across the polished surface and came to rest near Felix's feet. The room went quiet. Candace stood frozen, her hand at her throat where the necklace had been. For the first time since Felix had known her as Candace Wright, she looked vulnerable, exposed. Felix bent down and picked up the ring. He should have just handed it back. That was what a server was supposed to do. That was what an invisible man would do. But he was tired of being invisible. He straightened and looked at Victoria Hayes. This ring was made by a 14-year-old boy who had nothing. No family, no money, no future. He made it for a girl who had even less on a Christmas Eve when neither of them had anyone else in the world. The ballroom was silent. It took him an hour, and he cut his hands twice doing it. Felix continued, his voice steady, even though his heart was pounding. It was the most valuable thing he had ever owned because it was the only thing he had to give. Candace stared at him. Her eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted. Felix walked toward her and placed the ring gently in her palm. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The room remained frozen around them. Then Candace's fingers closed around the ring, and something shifted in her expression. Something raw and wounded and desperately hopeful. Victoria Hayes laughed nervously. "Well, that was quite the performance. Who is this man? Someone call security." "That won't be necessary." Candace's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "This gala is over." She turned and walked toward the exit, the ring clutched in her hand. Felix watched her go, knowing that everything had changed. The next morning, Felix was summoned to HR. His supervisor sat behind a desk covered in papers, looking uncomfortable. There had been a complaint about his behavior at the gala. Inappropriate conduct toward the CEO. He was being placed on administrative suspension, pending an investigation. Felix nodded. He had expected this. He cleaned out his locker and walked home in the gray morning light, his mind strangely calm. He had no job. He had burned through his savings. He had publicly humiliated himself in front of the entire company. But for the first time in 20 years, he had told the truth. When he got to his apartment, he found an envelope taped to his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "You kept your promise in your own way, but I can't go back to being the girl who waited. I built a new life from the ashes of the old one, and I don't know how to trust again. Don't look for me." It was signed with a single letter E. Felix read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket next to his heart. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The days that followed were the hardest Felix had faced since his wife walked out. His savings lasted 2 weeks. He applied for jobs at other companies, but references took time, and his suspension from Wright Industries raised questions he couldn't answer without explaining the whole impossible story. He picked up day labor when he could find it, loading trucks, cleaning warehouses, anything that paid cash at the end of the shift. Isaiah noticed. Children always notice more than adults give them credit for. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked one evening, watching Felix count coins on the kitchen table. Felix told him he was fine, just figuring some things out. "Is it about the lady, the one from your story?" Felix looked up. He had told Isaiah a version of the truth after the gala, a simplified story about a friend from childhood, a promise made long ago, a reunion that didn't go the way he hoped. He hadn't mentioned Candace's name or her position. Some things were too complicated for an 8-year-old. "Yeah," Felix admitted. "It's about her." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, his small face serious. "You said you apologized, but she's still sad. I think she's been sad for a long time, longer than I knew." "Then maybe sorry isn't enough." Isaiah picked at a thread on his sleeve. My teacher says that when you really hurt someone, you have to show them you changed. Not just tell them, you have to do something. Felix stared at his son. Sometimes the simplest truths came from the smallest people. "When did you get so smart?" he asked. Isaiah shrugged. "I listen." That night after his son was asleep, Felix sat alone in the darkness of his apartment and thought about what it meant to apologize with actions instead of words. He had spent his entire adult life running from the boy he used to be, the orphan, the abandoned one, the kid who made promises he couldn't keep. He had built walls around that boy, convinced himself that staying invisible was the same as staying safe, but walls didn't protect, they imprisoned. If he kept hiding, he would teach Isaiah that men were supposed to bury their mistakes instead of owning them. He would pass down the same legacy of silence and shame that had crippled him for 20 years. He couldn't do that to his son. He wouldn't. Finding Candace took 3 days. She had disappeared from the public eye after the gala canceling meetings and delegating responsibilities to her executive team. The business press speculated about illness, burnout, a secret scandal. No one knew the truth. Felix tried her office, her penthouse, every place he could think of. Nothing. Then he remembered something Lena had told him once during one of those cold nights at St. Augustine. She talked about a house she had seen from the orphanage's back courtyard, an old Victorian on the hill, abandoned and crumbling but beautiful in a broken way. "If I ever have money," she had said, "I'm going to buy that house and fix it up, so I can look down at this place and know I survived." St. Augustine Children's Home had been demolished 5 years ago, replaced by a strip mall that nobody visited. But the house might still be there. Felix took 3 buses to get to Baltimore. The Victorian looked exactly as he imagined, peeling paint-broken windows, a porch that sagged in the middle like a tired spine. The strip mall loomed behind it, garish and new, but the house remained untouched, a monument to something no one else remembered. Candace's car was parked in the overgrown driveway. He found her sitting on the back steps in almost the exact spot where the orphanage courtyard used to be. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, nothing like the polished CEO he had seen in boardrooms and ballrooms. She looked younger. She looked like Lena. The ring hung around her neck on a new chain. She didn't seem surprised to see him. Part of her had been waiting, even if she would never admit it. "I told you not to look for me," she said. "I know." Felix stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "But I've spent 20 years not looking for you. I'm done running." Candace stared at the empty lot where St. Augustine used to stand. They tore it down like it never existed. Like we never existed. We existed. Felix sat down on the step beside her, close enough to touch but not touching. "We still exist." She finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed, exhausted. "I don't know who I am anymore, Felix. I built Candace Wright out of nothing. I made myself into someone who didn't need anyone, who couldn't be hurt, who never waited for anything. And then you showed up, and suddenly I'm 13 years old again, sitting in the cold, believing that someone is going to save me. I'm not here to save you. Then why are you here?" Felix reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a bundle of papers, yellowed with age, held together by a rubber band. He had kept them in a box under his bed for 18 years, unable to throw them away, unable to look at them. "These are the letters I wrote you," he said. "After I left, I wrote one every week for the first year. I begged you to write back. I told you I was coming for you." Candace took the bundle with trembling hands. She unfolded the first letter, and her breath caught as she recognized his handwriting, younger, messier, but unmistakably his. "I never got these," she whispered. "I know. I found out later that the director intercepted them. She thought outside contact would disrupt placements." Felix's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "I thought you had forgotten me. I thought the promise meant nothing to you. So I tried to forget too." Candace read through the letters one by one, tears streaming down her face. Each one was filled with details: the farm in Ohio, the cows he milked at dawn, the family who treated him more like hired help than a son. And in every letter the same refrain: I'm coming back for you. Wait for me. I promise. You didn't forget, she said. Never, not for a single day. Felix turned to face her fully. The promise I made you wasn't a lie. It was the only thing that made me believe I had value when I was a kid with nothing. And I failed to keep it, not because I stopped caring, but because the world got in the way and I was too young and too powerless to fight it. Candace set the letters down carefully, like they were made of glass. I built my whole life around being someone who didn't need you, she said. Someone who didn't need anyone. And now you're here and I don't know how to let that go. I'm not asking you to let it go. Felix took her hand, gently giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. I'm not asking you to forgive me or forget what happened. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that I'm not the same boy who left. I'm a man now, a father, and I'm not going to disappear again. Candace looked at their joined hands, his rough and calloused from years of labor, hers smooth and manicured from years of boardrooms. I don't need you to keep your promise, she said quietly. That promise was made by children who didn't know what the world would do to them. I don't need a ring or a wedding or any of that. Then what do you need? She met his eyes, and for the first time since he had known her as Candace Wright, he saw Lena looking back at him. I need you to stay, she said. Even when it's hard. Even when I push you away. I need you to prove that you're not going to leave again. Felix squeezed her hand. I'm not going anywhere. 3 months later, Felix had a new job, not at Wright Industries, but at a smaller company across town, working as a facilities manager. He had found it through a contact from one of his day labor jobs, a supervisor who valued hard work over complicated references. It paid less than his old position, but the hours were better and he didn't have to work nights anymore. He could be home when Isaiah finished school, could cook dinner instead of ordering pizza, could help with homework at the kitchen table. Candace came by on Saturdays. She and Felix weren't rushing anything. There were too many years between them, too much pain to unpack in a few weeks or months. But she came by, and they talked, and slowly the walls she had built began to show cracks. Isaiah adored her. He didn't know the whole story, he was too young for that. But he knew that she was important to his father, and that was enough. One Saturday afternoon, Candace arrived carrying a small box. She sat down on the couch next to Felix while Isaiah played in the backyard, and she opened the box to reveal 2 rings. The first was the original copper wire and blue glass, battered and tarnished but intact. The second was new, simple silver, unadorned, clearly handmade. I had this made, Candace said, holding up the silver ring. Not to replace the old one, just to add to it. A ring for who we are now, not just who we were. Felix took the silver ring and examined it. It was imperfect, the band slightly uneven, the surface not quite smooth. Did you make this yourself? He asked. Candace smiled, and it was the same smile he remembered from 20 years ago when a 13-year-old girl had looked at a crude copper ring and chosen to believe in something impossible. I tried. I'm not very good with my hands. It's perfect. He slid the ring onto his finger. It fit. Isaiah burst through the back door, grass stains on his knees, breathless with excitement. Dad, Miss Candace. Come look, there's a bird building a nest in the tree. Candace looked at Felix. Felix looked at Candace. And then they both stood up and followed the boy outside into the sunshine, into whatever came next. Behind them on the coffee table, the 2 rings sat side by side, one made of copper and glass, one made of silver. One for the past, one for the future. And somewhere in a place that no longer existed except in memory, 2 children who had once had nothing finally had everything they needed. Not because a promise was kept perfectly, but because someone came back. Not everyone who breaks a promise is a betrayer. Sometimes they're just orphans who never believed they deserved happiness. And forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about giving someone the chance to prove they've changed. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to make things right. If this touched your heart, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when the next story drops. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.